Hi everybody, welcome back to MelDidItHerself. And today we are working on this beautiful vintage desk to give it a bit of an upgrade, a little bit of a facelift. So the backstory is one night I was sitting at home and my friend texted me and was like, Mel, I just was out with the dog taking her for a walk and I saw this cool furniture piece at one of my neighbors nearby. They might want to do like a DIY on. I was like, awesome, love it. Where was it? What was it? And then she fell asleep. So I was like sitting at home and I'm like itching. I'm like, well, what if it was something cool? So I hopped in the car and like drove over. She doesn't live too far from me. And I was just kind of like aimlessly driving up and down the street surrounding her house. And I saw this, which turned out to be what she was referring to. So that was perfect. You can see it's in pretty great shape. The drawers are all pretty good, not many stains in there, which was awesome, made my job much easier. It's missing one of the hardware pulls on the top drawer there, but other than that, it was pretty great. I'm assuming this is probably from around this 1960s era. And you can see the top there, there's definitely some damage in the top veneer. It was like deeply scratched from something, but I think it's nothing too crazy that we can't handle, so let's see what we can do. So to begin with the prep work, I'm just taking my screwdriver and taking off any of the hardware that is on this piece, which for this one is just the hardware pulls. So these are actually like in multiple pieces. You have the pull itself, and then there's two little like nubbin pieces that are actually going into the drawer front, and then the back plates, which are those circular decorative pieces. And then I'm just putting those in a container to keep them all together so I don't lose any pieces with the screws. And we'll see if I'm going to end up using these or not at the end. And then the most important part of your refinishing process is the prep work. So here I'm using some shop rags and TSP cleaner, which is just a heavy duty degreaser and cleaner. So I'm spraying that all over the surfaces of the drawers, of the top and of the sides of the piece, and then going in with the shop rags and giving it a good clean. Even if it doesn't look like there's any dirt or anything on your pieces, don't skip this step, because if there's ever any grease or oil or like dust in there that you can't see and that ends up being underneath your paint, it's really going to affect the finish. And you'll be surprised how dirty these shop rags end up being when you do this step. So I highly encourage you not to skip this step. Get it all wiped down, and then afterwards go in with a clean cloth with some just like water on it and wipe down the surface of it, and then let that dry. And what that does is obviously gets the remnants of the TSP cleaner off of the piece so that the degreaser isn't going to affect the paint or the finish that you use as well. Alright, so bear with me because I had a tripod for my phone and then it broke. So this is kind of like the in lieu time while I was waiting for a replacement piece to get sent over. So footage is a little bit shaky. But I wanted to start by tackling this top because, like I said, the scratches in there were very deep into the veneer. So I started by going through with my sander here, and I was using about 80 grit sandpaper. And it did a good job of scuff sanding, but it wasn't really getting deep enough to get those actual scratches out. So then I switched over to my Hitachi orbital sander with, I believe, the same 80 grit sandpaper, and just went nice and slow with it, and it did a much better job of getting deep down into those scratches and kind of leveling out that veneer a bit better. So you could see this took, a lot longer than it looks like it did, but finally got it all down. So now it's down to the kind of bare bone veneer, and I'm just going through with a damp microfiber cloth and getting any of the leftover dirt or dust that remains from the sanding process. Once I got this all cleaned up, I did notice that there were some little cracks in the veneer, some chips. You can see there just some spots where there's chips in the veneer, so it's like a little bit of a hole. So I'm just going to fill those with this Elmer's wood filler. I got it at Home Depot. It's like $8. I have it in the natural color, but you can get it in any color because we're going to paint over it after. But I just put that down, let it dry completely, and then sanded it lightly with about 150 grit sandpaper. So then it's all flush with the top of the desk. And then any of those scratches that you can see there are just surface level. They're not like deep into the wood, so we won't see those when we paint over it. Okay, so now I'm tackling the drawers and the drawer fronts. So I'm just going through with my orbital sander again, using an 80 grit to get that preliminary finish off of the top. There's a bit of a glossy, kind of like purpley red finish on it. So I'm just taking that down to kind of like the bare wood. And then I followed that up with between 150 and 200 grit sandpaper. And that's just to smooth out the finish a little bit more. And you can see also wearing ear protection and a mask while doing this, as well as sunglasses just to protect the eyes, mouth, and ears from the sander. So here you can see what the finish was before the sanding, and then after, showing that beautiful wood grain through. Okay, so I didn't film a lot of the painting process because it's a little bit mundane, and that's just kind of like my relaxing time when I throw on a podcast and just kind of get in the groove of it. But this is what the desk looked like after one coat of paint, and it's still wet and drying, but just to give you an idea. And I used the Rustoleum chalked paint in Country Gray, and this is an old one I had. I probably used maybe at most a quarter of this container, probably not even. But just to give you an idea when using it, so it's a pretty thick consistency. It's a chalk-based paint, so it's pretty thick on its own. So as you can see, I just have a misting bottle that I keep by me, and I just periodically mist first of all the brush before I put it into the paint, and then the brush after I've dipped it into the paint. And you need like so much less paint than you think. So you'll notice if you were to just go straight in with the paint with nothing on it, like no water to water it down, it can look really streaky. So this just helps to thin it out. Some people prefer to put a bit of the paint into a separate container and then put water in that and mix it up. That's totally an option too. With this formula, I do find if I put too much water on some spots, it results in a bit different of a color. Like the gray becomes a little bit lighter as it gets more watered down, so keep that in mind. But just take your time. It's a pretty smooth formula, especially when it's watered down a bit, so I do enjoy it, and it's a very easy brand to get your hands on. I just picked this one up at Home Depot, and I think it's about $30 for that container, which is I think 946 milliliters. So I've done multiple projects using this color and mixing it in with other paints, and it's gone quite a long ways because it is so thick. So it's one that I like to use when I can. Okay, so I think I ended up doing about 2.5 to 3 coats of paint, and this is what we ended up with. It's still drying a little bit here, but turned out nice and smooth. I love how the detailing on the top there really got accentuated by the painting of it. And then for the drawers, I did a bit of a wash because I wanted it to be a bit more cohesive with the color of the unit. So I just mixed 50% water, 50% paint, and put that on there, let it sit for a couple minutes on the fronts, and then wiped it off. And you can see for the sides on the edges, I did paint those as well as the details on there because they were a little bit darker from the original finish. I did also decide on the hardware for this. I'm going to use the hardware that it came with. I just gave that a clean with some soap and water, and then I had this little cane pull that I had gotten from a little shop in a nearby town that I thought was super cute. It doesn't perfectly match the like antique gold color of the original hardware, but I think it's gonna be cohesive enough that it'll work out. So I did also paint the base there the same gray color after, as well as finish the whole piece with Annie Sloan wax in clear. So that's it drying there on the top, and I also did the sides and everything else, and then went through and wiped off any excess after a couple minutes with just a lint-free cloth. So it gives it a nice, kind of like a shiny finish, but it also helps to protect it. It'll take about 30 days to cure completely, but once it dries overnight, it will definitely be more solid. And you can see I put some of the hardware on there and it was looking good. But for the center one, for the cane pull, the bolts were just slightly, like maybe 1/4 of an inch too wide on either side. So I'm just going through with a drill, and it drove me a bit crazy how like long this took. But I'm just kind of like widening each of the holes that were already there to try and make it fit this cane pull. I could have filled these holes completely and then redid them, but I opted to go this route. It didn't look perfect after the fact, but it did the trick. But yeah, definitely an option would have been to completely fill with wood filler the holes and then re-drill them. But since these holes were already centered, I figured this made the most sense. Okay, and just some reminders for what we started out with here with this vintage desk. And once it was all done, this is what we ended up with. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you have any questions about the process or anything that I left out, please feel free to leave it in the comments below. I would love if you would take a second to subscribe to my channel if you enjoy this kind of content. I also do DIYs and other kind of makeovers on furniture and related items. And I'd love if you'd also follow me on Instagram at the same handle, MelDidItHerself, and you can get lots of behind the scenes action and other projects that I'm working on. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe before you leave, and I'll see you in the next one.